in China, in Palestine, and in Poland. And I'm now, since last summer, representing the Friedrich Ebert Foundation in North America. We work since 1979 in the United States of America, and since 10 years we are also present in Canada. And that's why it's very important for us to be part here of this progressive summit, part of the progressive movement, and part to feel the progressive pulse that we believe is going to change Canada, but also the transatlantic cooperation and the international cooperation for the better. And this is why I think that this panel is particularly important, because we're going to talk about how we're going to win, how we're going to match the moment with the movement, and how we're going to create momentum for the future, for a progressive future, for a better future, for the future where the working people get what they deserve and where we're going to really achieve social justice nationally, but we're also going to work for social justice internationally. And I guess I'm also here to remind you that traditionally and historically, the social democratic movement was always an international one, and that international cooperation and international solidarity are very important for the progressive movement, and my foundation tries to facilitate that. And I would like to invite you also, if you think about the future, about the political future of Canada, about the political future of North America, that you think about building a stronger transatlantic relationship, but a transatlantic relationship that does not only deal with NATO, but a transatlantic relationship that also tackles the issues that we care about, the questions of equality in our societies, equal chances in our societies, freedom in our societies, and diversity in our societies, and that we can work together, Europeans, Canadians, to build that in the Western world. And I think we have a very important moment with a very challenging American political administration that challenges our ideas on a daily basis, and that we have to use that moment to counterbalance it with a social democratic, progressive, international, and now for us mainly transatlantic cooperation. Now, and I'm very glad that you organized this panel here where we're going to speak about how we're going to create political momentum, match the moment with the movement. And it's going to be also an international panel, and that's very good because I think we can also learn from the successes that we achieved in different political environments, but also maybe from the challenges like right-wing populism, also right-wing nationalism, white terrorism, intimidation, voter suppression, all the many challenges we face, and we can learn from each other, which will make us stronger and which will hopefully make us win elections. When I look at the US, of course, I hope that next year the progressive movement is going to win the election. But when I look at Canada, I also hope that you're going to seize the moment and have, as progressives, a very good result in the election that is coming up. I don't know if you follow European affairs, but also if you do, you will notice that in May we do have a very important election, and I hope you will also support us there, because we do need it. It's a very crucial moment for the future of the European Union and for Europe in general, and also, I would say, for the future of the progressive social democratic movement in general. So we need your support for that too. And now I would like to just say, you know, we are very much inspired by Willy Brandt, the first social democratic chancellor of Germany, and where we are very proud that we have the possibility to work together with the Broadband Institute, in particular because Ed Broadbent was a personal friend of Willy Brandt. And Willy Brandt said two things that are very important to me, and I would like to remind you of these two things because I think they're a good spirit for the summit. One thing is he always said international cooperation is too important to be left to governments alone, and I think we can definitely subscribe to that. And another one is, and that's more for domestic politics, all politics can go to hell if it doesn't improve the life of the working people. So with that, I hope that we're going to have now a great panel discussion. Anja Krzypek, my friend, she's a true European. She comes from Poland, but she is one of the leaders of our sister foundation, the European Social Democratic Political Foundation, and she will introduce now the panel, and she will also make sure that we're going to have a very stimulating and interesting discussion how to use the moment and hopefully win in the upcoming elections and also win the political battles that we have to, well, face, and hopefully we face them successfully. No proszę Ania do podium I kierować dyskusję. Dziękuję. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are extremely excited to be entering the panel after what is lunch break. Usually this is a very unfavorable moment, but we amongst ourselves set up a following challenge for ourselves, that even though there had been enormously a lot already said, that the discussions were so rich, we are going to make our best to make our panel memorable and the one to remember. So here it is. My name has been mentioned already before. It's true that I'm a European, I'm a convinced social democrat, and I'm a progressive. And what brings me to Progress Summit for the second time is actually because I believe that when we talk about democracy and when we talk about the future of democracy, we are all talking about personal story. The country I come from, which is Poland, only 30 years ago turned to be a democratic country. And today, only a generation after, it is what can be named as authoritarian regime. And the lesson that I draw is that you can never take democracy for granted. You have to always seek a dialogue and inspiration, also overseas and over the borders. And one of the speakers said this morning, the front line is global. And this is why I'm here today. Now, I had a very long journey yesterday, which made me almost inhabit the airport of Montreal, I have to say, for a couple of hours. And wandering to kill the time, I was wandering from kiosk to kiosk. And I think it's always very interesting because even though the airports look very much the same in the globalized world, the kiosks are showing you pretty much what the country wants to say to you when you arrive about itself. And unlike in many other big cities and places all over the world, I didn't find so many of the guidebooks, but I actually found one book in display, which was called Our Canada, Our Country, Our Stories. And this is how we are going to kick off this conversation, because I think that the genuine added value of Progress Summit is precisely this, the stories that connect us today. And Ilya, why don't you kick off start and tell us your story, why you are here and what brings you to the progressive movement and remain hopeful still in those days?
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for having me. It's a treat to be here. I'm Ilya Shaman. I'm the executive director of Mouvement Political Action. We're a millions-strong member service organization in the United States that organizes to build a country where there's a place of honor and dignity for everyone. Black, white, brown, native, born, fifth generation, you name it. And to build a country where everyone can thrive. But rather than telling you my whole personal story, I figured I would just share a quick anecdote that I think captures the moment we're in right now, which is about 2 years ago, a little bit more than that, my wife and I were expecting our first child. As people do, we had a few friends over to have a little party to celebrate the baby that was on its way. We gathered with our friends at our apartment in San Francisco where we were living at the time, and that same morning, news had come down of Donald Trump's Muslim ban. Now, my wife is Iranian. Her mother, my mother-in-law, was subject to the first version of the ban, which meant she would potentially not be able to meet her grandson that was on the way. And so that same day, after the party, the celebration we had for our soon-to-be arrival, we got in a car and drove to San Francisco airport met thousands of protesters from all walks of life who were standing up against the Muslim ban, who were protesting together. Now, that was an incredibly hopeful moment. It spoke to the power of resistance and energy and activation. But the thing I knew in that moment is that the policy that had passed had not just been a product of that one moment, that we'd already experienced a Muslim ban years earlier when my relatives couldn't come for our wedding under the Obama administration, that the legacy of Islamophobia had existed for decades and centuries in the United States, even before Donald Trump came to office. And so I'm thrilled to be here in part to talk about how the acute challenges we're seeing around the world, brought about by populism and so much else, really are just bringing to the surface a lot of the chronic underlying challenges that we have failed to face for too long, and that we got to tackle those if we're ever to make it out of this dark moment that so much of the world is facing. So thank you so much for having me.
Charlene, I'm sure that you want to jump in, especially that Ilya spoke about the question of equality this morning. You gave us a very brilliant, insightful message about freedom. The floor is yours.
Yeah, so again, thank you all for having me here and to continue the conversation, because there's only so much you can say in 6 minutes. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to share more. I come from the south side of Chicago. And we were in a conversation this afternoon at lunch, and someone referred to the United States as the South. And that was so interesting to me, because there's an ongoing just set of tensions and challenges when we talk about the realities of the northern part of the United States and the southern part of the United States. There are a lot of regional differences from the Northeast to the Midwest, where I'm from, to the South, to the West, the Northwest, all of the Southwest, all of these places. And so I am the daughter of two parents whose mothers migrated from Mississippi, which is the southern part of the United States. And people oftentimes say that Chicago is just up south. It's really just up south. It's northern Mississippi. And the reason why that's important is because Chicago was one of the landing places for millions, frankly, of the people, one of the many landing places for the millions of black people who migrated from the South. But black folks have actually been in Chicago for over 100 years. So even before the two major waves of the Great Migration in the early 1900s, and then again in the 1940s, 1950s-ish, our people have been there a very long time. And what we are, and noting that we weren't the first people to even be there, right? There were people there, and still are people who have been there for generations upon generations. And how I situate myself as a black person in the U.S., a black person in the world, is a descendant of people who migrated, a descendant of people who were forcibly migrated through the transatlantic slave trade, and a person who currently lives in a community and in a city where nearly 200,000 black people have left, just in a span of 10 years, left. And as major forces of displacement, and some that were similar to the forces that brought their ancestors to Chicago in the first place. And so there's this really, I don't know the right word, because it's beyond interesting, it's also heartbreaking dynamic to live in a city that is the third largest city in the United States, which also has the second largest police force in the country. And it's also, I believe, one of the best places in the world for food, frankly, if you're looking for a good meal. So all of these things full of contradictions, and that's what brings me to this work. Being hyper aware of the contradictions of what it means to live, both to resist and also to practice resilience in this world, and to also understand that the way out of it is a long-term struggle. And that the long-term struggle for black liberation, even on this land, the land that we're on right now, the land that's south of here, and the land that's across the world, it goes beyond just me. And it also even goes just beyond black people. And it is an opportunity to call everyone in to understanding that when black folks get free, that means everybody will too. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think the point also that you started off, it's an extremely important factor, because the way we think about the world and we think about the agenda is very much framed by geography and the imagination of the institutions. And I think what is the purpose of this, and Knut said it was going to be a global conversation, is about changing the front lines of the imagination as well, how we can build a better world. Now, I think we've heard just two very diverse stories, and I'd like to move to Boshra, parce que bien sûr tu as commencé à être actif parce que aussi il y a la cause de gens qui sont oubliés, qui sont exclus. Est-ce que tu pourrais nous dire un peu de mots comment ça s'est commencé?
Bonjour, merci également de m'accueillir aujourd'hui. Je vais être la panéliste francophone. Je suis chercheur et je travaille aujourd'hui dans une organisation qui s'appelle Parole d'exclus. Et je vais vous expliquer un petit peu la boucle géographique qui m'amène à cette organisation. Tout commence en Tunisie, où je suis née il y a un certain nombre d'années, dans une famille où la politique, c'était notre quotidien. Et des fois, je m'amuse à dire que je suis un peu comme Obélix qui est tombé dans la potion magique. Je suis tombée dans la politique très très jeune. Et je suis tombée dans une famille pour laquelle la question du pluralisme et la question du pluralisme politique était, une vertu ou quelque chose pour laquelle il fallait se battre. Et c'est justement ce type de combat qui a mené ma famille à devoir quitter. Donc j'ai ensuite quitté la Tunisie pour grandir en France, où ma famille et moi étions des réfugiés, donc on était réfugiés politiques. Et dans ce deuxième pays, j'ai découvert une autre forme de combat qui était la question du racisme. J'ai découvert le racisme en arrivant à l'école au jour numéro 1. Et donc c'est tout mon parcours qui a été impacté ou qui a été touché par toutes ces questions de racisme, de discrimination, parfois pas directement, mais avec les personnes avec qui je pouvais avancer. Et c'est en décidant dans le fond de choisir une société dans laquelle je pouvais habiter et espérer être une femme musulmane qui peut se dire féministe sans que ça n'irrite les oreilles de personne, qui puisse travailler sans subir le plafond de verre, etc. Et donc c'est comme ça que je choisis Montréal et le Québec. Et donc cette boucle, en fait, quand j'essaye d'en faire un peu la narrative, la question du pluralisme et la question de l'islamophobie en est partie prenante à chacune des étapes et à chacune des stations. Et donc je me retrouve aujourd'hui à travailler dans un quartier, dans un territoire, parce que pour moi la question des échelles est très importante. La façon avec laquelle on ancre le changement dans les discours, mais aussi dans les espaces, est quelque chose de primordial. Et donc je travaille dans un quartier qui s'appelle Montréal-Nord, donc à Montréal, et qui est reconnu au niveau national canadien pour être un espace, disons, de pauvreté, mais qui, pour moi, rassemble surtout des personnes qui vivent des conditions de défavorisation, beaucoup de personnes racisées, évidemment, et des enjeux, justement, de profilage racial, beaucoup de problématiques de racisme systémique qui se concentrent dans un même territoire, mais qui me rejoignent, évidemment, parce que dans ma propre trajectoire, j'estime que c'est là que je dois être.
Merci beaucoup, très impressionnant. I think, three very different stories, but coming down to the same intention. You live in a community, you want to make a difference, you want to improve the world that people live in, offer more opportunities, and you want to cherish the pluralism. And I think what's very powerful, and someone said it already this morning, is that because those stories are authentic and they stand for the values that are so much at the core, they actually transcend. And I'd like to use the second round, and we are going to do it in a sort of a reverse order to bring some dynamic here. I would like to ask about the following thing. I mean, the title of our panel is Matching the Movement to the Moment. And I think it was Jerry Diaz who this morning got even angry talking about the self-imposed limits of politics, while so many other speakers were talking about, people mobilizing, going on the streets, standing for their cause and trying to make the difference, but rather outside of the political parties. Also, a Broadbent's reflection this morning was that we have to be somehow self-critical. Why is it so that there are mobilizations In some countries, they even become political parties. I mean, Spain, France, to give European examples. And they seem to be grasping the momentum. And we, seeing so many people seeking the change, and the polling just before was about people seeking social justice, we cannot tap into this moment as the progressives, even though it's at the whole heart of our values. Alors, je voudrais commencer avec toi, parce que tu as l'expérience énorme. Alors, je voudrais te demander comment on peut vraiment prendre l'inspiration de mouvements, qu'est-ce qu'on observe, et qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire comme le progressiste pour rester optimiste, en tout cas.
Mais on n'a pas le choix de rester optimiste, c'est un devoir. Non, mais...
I think it deserves applause. I mean, being optimistic in those times, yes.
Je pense qu'on a un devoir d'optimisme, mais également peut-être aussi un devoir de réalisme qui doit se baser sur certaines valeurs. La question de la solidarité, je pense, la question de la transmission, par exemple, aux personnes qui partagent les mêmes conditions que nous. Émilie Nicolas parlait ce matin des enjeux, par exemple, d'islamophobie. On est dans une époque où la question de l'islamophobie est un enjeu international, c'est un enjeu global. J'allais dire, la violence se répand de la Nouvelle-Zélande à Paris, à la Syrie, à Québec. Donc, on est tous concernés et on peut être tous potentiellement concernés par cette dilution de la sécurité et de la question de la sécurité qui vient, dans le fond, fragiliser la stabilité que la démocratie permet. Et donc, je pense qu'on est tous des potentielles victimes de ne plus vivre dans un espace démocratique. Et donc, quelque part, c'est quelque chose, comme tu as dit tout à l'heure, qui est un combat à toujours avoir et à mener. Comment on reste optimiste? On doit, je pense, intégrer des espaces qui doivent être très différents. Prendre la rue est une des façons de protester, de contester. Je vais me permettre de citer Malcolm X, mais je pense que, comme il disait, il faut être optimiste et faire des transformations by any means necessary. Je ne suis pas en train d'invoquer les enjeux de violence, mais je pense qu'il faut autant transformer les discours, la conversation publique en influençant les médias, en tentant d'être présent, par exemple, médiatiquement, mais aussi être présent dans les institutions. Si on ne tente pas de transformer les institutions de l'intérieur, je pense qu'on peut continuer de subir de la bureaucratie raciste comme Hannah Arendt en parlait déjà il y a plus d'une 60aine d'années. Donc je crois qu'il y a une façon avec laquelle on doit, de façon très complémentaire et très solidaire dans les mouvements et dans les luttes, quelque part, c'est ça, intégrer tous les espaces qui doivent être transformés.
Thank you very much. And I'm moving right away to Charlene, because you've said, okay, one needs to continue and one needs to have a courage and solidarity to persevere in the fight. But evidently nowadays, especially politics, is all about deliverables. And this morning we were talking about the limits of politics. So what is deliverable in the epic fight that we are actually embarking on? What do you think?
Well, it's interesting that you say the fight that we're embarking on. Like I'm 33 years old, but literally every time I open my mouth to talk about something, I'm going to talk about history. Because this isn't the first time we've been in struggle before. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last time. Even when we live in a world where we deal with conflict, harm, and violence without prisons and policing, we will still actually have to struggle. Even when we live in an economy that's not reliant on capitalism, we will still have to struggle. Even if we ever get to a point where human beings manage to not engage in war, we will still have to struggle. And so I think we do ourselves a disservice when we think the resistance is new, or we think that this is the first time at the rodeo. It doesn't mean that the conditions aren't new, right? The system of work and labor in the world is different than it was 100 years ago. Systems of labor are different than they were even 50 years ago. With technology, with an increase, or depending on what level you believe in or engage in, the idea of globalization and capital and how all those things actually operate with each other, these things change. Capitalism goes in and out of crisis. It goes in and out of flux. It gets stronger. It gets more entrenched. It's reactionary, all these things. Patriarchy continues to evolve itself. Anti-Blackness is a global phenomenon that shows up in the prison industrial complex. It shows up in the forced sterilization of East African women in Israel. It shows up in many places. And so it's not new. None of this is new. And I think the fact that is, in as much as the oppression is not new, the marginalization is not new, the resistance is also not new. The resilience is not new. And that is what keeps me optimistic. It's knowing that people have struggled before me and that I have a responsibility. It is my duty to fight. It is my duty to be in this thing in the way that it makes sense for me. And it's that finding that spot between my actual skills and what is necessary, what the moment calls me to do. That's what it's about. And for some people, as an individual, you are embarking on something. You may have entered this room today as a progressive on certain issues. And maybe you'll leave this summit with different views, even farther left on issues, right? And you're embarking on a new thing. Maybe by the end of this weekend, I'll convert somebody into an abolitionist. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Or a feminist. Who knows? We may be successful in making that happen. And so that means you're embarking on a new part of your journey. And in embarking on new parts of this work is an invitation, I think, to expand what you think is possible and to expand what collective liberation means and what it looks like. And that's an opportunity. That's a hell of an opportunity for you as an individual and also for us as a collective to bring more and more people into our work. 20 years ago, people were not talking at mass because there's not an issue that nobody cares about. It's just probably an issue that you didn't know people cared about or doesn't get enough attention. There's no such thing as no one cares about any given thing. Someone cares about it, just may not be you or people with money who actually care about it, And so that's a part of our work, right? Is to bring more people into it and to recognize that there are people who have been in it already and that we can find, I think, some power in realizing that we're not the first and we won't be the last to do it.
Fantastic. I mean, if I read you both correctly, I mean, it takes, of course, a grand degree of passion and perseverance, but also a sense of responsibility for the legacy that is already a proud legacy when it comes to liberation movement, to social democracy, but also the sense of responsibility for the others, but also a question of imagination to be able to seek through that another world is absolutely possible. I think, coming back to Ilya in this round, when you've been talking about your experience to begin and the question of connecting, and I mean looking at both the inspiration, the how you measure the success, I want to come back to this question of community building, because indeed for this 48 amazing hours, we are a community of the good-willing people here gathered, ready to push the borders of imagination. But where I would like to come to you is, we hear so much and, we talk about the moment. I mean, what is the nature of the moment we are in? We are hearing all these things about, the challenges of the world. The world is going into absolutely wrong direction. People are getting fragmented. Before the panel on populism was talking about antagonizing and aggression even among the people. So, from your perspective, from your work, how do you build relations? How do you actually bring people together?
Well, when I think about the moment, I'm of the same generation as Charlene, which means our experience was, I was in high school when the US launched an illegal war in Iraq with a number of coalition partners in Europe and elsewhere. I was in college at McGill, actually, when the global financial crisis hit, and my generation graduated off a cliff to no jobs, to no possibility of ever acquiring a home, and to a sense that in the US, at least, this is the first generation that will do worse than the previous one economically. So that's the reality that my generation, potentially the generation right after us, is currently facing. And so this is a moment of both profound risk and also in which it should not be surprising that status quo politics and status quo parties are out of favor. It should not be surprising that people are throwing the institutions that have failed us at every level asunder, right? If I, as a 16-year-old, could do enough Googling to figure out the war in Iraq was based on a lie, why couldn't the New York Times do that? That's the experience of my generation. And so I think what that speaks to is the fact that a lot of what we're seeing is a very natural process of when institutions fail, when they fail to deliver a place of honor and dignity for populations across all sorts of difference, then there's a hunger for something new. And so to me, and I think Charlene sort of spoke of this is a moment of tremendous opportunity. There is finally a conversation about climate change that is proposing solutions at the scale of the problem we face. There's finally an acknowledgement, at least in the US, and is starting to grapple with the history of white supremacy that has existed since the founding documents. There's finally a conversation about income inequality that is decades and decades overdue. So I think this is a moment where we have to listen to each other across difference and recognize that though the acute pain being felt in this moment is targeting some individuals, there are many who've been trying to scream from the rafters for decades or centuries about what they were facing. And the ability for us to form a common struggle, I think, will require us to acknowledge the entry points we have, the particular grievances we may have because we might be immigrants who might be targeted or may be afraid of losing some political power or whatever else, and connect them to the collective. Because our collective liberation is the only way we get individual liberation. And just to say it, I think the fact that we all stand on the shoulders of previous generations matters. So my story as somebody who came to the United States when I was 4 years old with a family of Jewish refugees from the former Soviet Union was possible because of decades and decades of organizing to liberate Soviet Jewry from the Soviet Union. Now, the exiled population in the US now is not super progressive. And yet it is the work I have to talk to my community to bring them into the broader struggle. And so I think when I think about community, I think it's a collective responsibility to speak to your people, whoever those people are, and bring them into the broader struggle, including agitating, including challenging, including doing the hard work of challenging some assumptions, of saying, I know that you see this from your vantage point as an immigrant or as a white person who might not be doing as well as the previous generation, but you got to reckon with how that fits with the whole, with the privilege you have, the abilities you have, the experiences others might be facing. And only then through those hard conversations that happen within families, within communities, in those spaces we don't think of as political, can we start to bridge across those lines? Can we start to build a common movement? And ultimately, that common movement is how we build the world we need. So why am I optimistic? Because generations of people fought for me. And it is our job to carry that work forward with our own communities and to bring them into this collective whole.
Thank you very much, Ilya, but thank you to you all, because essentially sharing a personal story is as deep, intimate as one can go. It is obviously, someone said it before, it is the basis of formulating an honest connection with the others. But it also takes a bit of courage to come up on the stage and says, this is what I stand for, you know, and this is what I'm going and I'm ready to do at most to make a difference. I think you all do an impressive work, but taking into account that we always say that we come for the different conferences to listen to one another, and then privileged 4 of us have been monopolizing the floor, I'd like to uphold the promise that we've made to the audience, namely of making this panel absolutely memorable. And I think if one lesson comes from the panel is the question of a sense of responsibility. And this panel will only be successful if we all make it a joint success, which is why, and now I would like to turn to the audience, giving you a time to reflect upon your personal stories that brought you to the Progressive Movement and to the Progress Summit today, but more in the angle of what do you think it takes to build a movement to match the momentum that is upon us. I'd like to give you 5 to 7 minutes to discuss around with your neighbors. I think Zita said it this morning, we start with trusting and looking at our neighbors, so that's what we are going to do. And I'm going to be rigid with time, after which there will be 2 microphones available for the audience to take the floor and come back with the questions to the panelists, or maybe with some remarks. or protest. I mean, protests are also quite welcome in this room, I would say. So 7 minutes starts now. I'd like you to find your interlocutors around the table, and if you are not seated at the table, to find your neighbors to converse with. And then we are going to distribute the mics to actually collect some of your insights. So the time is absolutely yours. Make it a very useful and insightful and successful one. If you have something else, I mean, I'm happy to. I think you guys are brilliant, and